So it seems like the entire workforce of the European Union is being replaced by artificial intelligence and low effort humans imported for the sole purpose of wiping their lazy, socialistically addicted asses off the face of the planet. I mean, thank God Canadians got off that godforsaken continent when we did. Boy, I never knew Sweden was so damn sensitive. What's wrong, guys? Is your Gripen not selling? April 27th, 2026. Welcome back to the Comic Reporter. It occurs to me that not many people will know the lore behind this bloodbath of a battle between the US and Sweden over who gets to build the fighter jets we'll use our fictitious pilots to fly. For those who don't know, back in 1997, Jean Chrétien signed a deal with the good old US of A to get them to keep us in the supply loop with the U.S. aerospace space program, a program that eventually became a jet called the F-35. If you don't remember that, I don't blame you. Jean Chrétien is the prime minister no one remembers we even had, unless you recall the time he tried to strangle a protester outside of Parliament, because that's, from what I understand, just something the French do. The man was so forgettable that most of the mistakes he made are actually credited to Stephen Harper, even though Harper spent most of his tenure trying to scrape the excrement off of the bottom of the bad decisions John made before he resigned. But you know who remembers John Chrétien? You know who never forgot that man's great vision for the future of Canada's defense and sovereignty? The military. The military refers to Jean Chrétien's time in office as the decade of darkness. Clearly a term of pure endearment. So the investment from Chrétien into this project started at $10 million for the right to keep our supply lines open in building and developing these F-35s. We've made billions on these transport and supply contracts over 30 years, but one of the reasons he did that deal was because just 2 years before, between 1994 and 1995, John Chrétien decided that Canada didn't need a military anymore and used its budget to cover a massive budget deficit left by the greatest prime minister to have ever lived, according to those who don't remember him very well, Brian Mulroney. The man who could make money disappear and reappear just by signing his name. It's a trait both he and Mark Carney share. I mean, you can see how this goes, I'm sure. Remember that this was back in the day when conservatives were liberal and liberals were conservatives, and before somehow we got to the point where the party lines are so blurred that we tried to paint the far right purple and no one believed it because how the hell is this color wheel this absurd? I'm pretty sure that at this point the PPC is just the anti-everything party. I mean, anyways. That initial $10 million spend from Chrétien allowed him to keep its lines open for Canada to supply everything the US needed to keep production and development of the F-35 moving. That eventually became $150 million over 3 decades just to make sure that they kept using Canadian steel and production lines. Think of it as a $150 million cover charge that allows us priority access to prime technology the moment it was ready. Just paying that fee didn't get Canada access to the planes, though. We still had to buy those. So in 2010, there he is again, Stephen Harper, tried to place an order for 65 F-35s at a price of $9 billion. I mean, not bad for 65 fifth-gen top-of-the-line fighter jets, except the price tag wasn't $9 billion. It turns out the Auditor General took one look at Stephen Harper's price tag and laughed Stephen right out of the room. So that order didn't even happen. In 2015, Justin Trudeau actually called the F-35 deal with the US a failed project and vowed never to buy those planes because they were far too expensive and said he would find a cheaper alternative. Except, of course, in 2023, Justin put in an order for 88 F-35s for $19 billion total. Yes, $19 billion. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you immediately hit Justin. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you immediately hit the Justin is a moron button because you can immediately see the price tag of $9 billion for Harper and $19 billion for Trudeau. Even when adjusting for inflation and including 23 more jets to the order, the math just doesn't add up. And you would be correct, it doesn't. Until you figure out that the planes Justin bought had a few things that Stephen's jets didn't quite have yet. like engines and software and basically anything that you would need to actually fly the jet off the lot. Yeah, Stephen Harper is an idiot. Luckily, the Auditor General at the time wasn't. Basically, Stephen Harper tried to order a cheeseburger without the cheese, or the patty, or the bun. Hold the ketchup, the mustard, no lettuce, please. Stephen Harper told the Americans he would pay for the box the cheeseburger would come in if there was a cheeseburger, and he expected the pilots not to notice. This is the best prime minister we ever had. This is a disaster. So, anyways, once Trudeau put down the order for 88 fighter jets as opposed to the super fun yet extremely expensive hand gliders Steve Harper wanted to buy, the US got to work on the first 16 units, which are actually set to arrive later this year. But once Donald Trump slammed the door on Canadian trade with the tariff situation, Mark Carney tried to use the opportunity to get out of the deal and, shop for cheaper alternatives. At least that's what he wants the EU and you to think. I mean, immediately Sweden showed up with their highly effective yet bargain basement JAS Gripen. The Gripen is fine for what it is. It can go Mach 2, super cruise to Mach 2.5. Plus, the mission data it collects while out over the Arctic can be collected and owned solely by Canada, which is pretty attractive when you consider that Sweden and Saab have offered to do not just the production of the order in Canada, but also build us a data center the US wouldn't have access to. The problem is that the bargain basement price is actually, yeah, it's a lie. It costs $60 million to build a Gripen, $138 million to buy and ship a Gripen, and over its 30-year expected lifespan, $40 billion to operate and maintain a Gripen. In comparison, it costs $84 million to build an F-35, $215 billion to buy and ship an F-35, and its 30-year expected lifespan, $72 billion to operate an F-35. I mean, over 30 years. And and you're saying, but comic, obviously the Gripen is cheaper, with all of those numbers being lower. I mean, I think you might in fact be illiterate. I don't blame you for thinking that, dear viewer. I do tend to read things backwards sometimes, but no, I just haven't finished yet. Calm down. The problem isn't actually the price. The problem is the Gripen is old. See, buying the Gripen is cheap on the tag, but expecting 30 years out of one is actually a massive stretch. The Gripen doesn't have stealth technology, is relatively slow and fully loaded, and doesn't possess a few of the things that would allow it to communicate with NORAD effectively. And that NORAD connection is literally everything. Buying the cheaper jet means installing all of the communication network and translation software and satellites it would need to communicate mission data to the United States through NORAD and NATO. The cost of the network? $5 billion on the surface. And you say, okay, well, that's still cheaper than the F-35. And yeah, again, you're correct, except that the network would be specifically for the Gripen. If a Gripen gets shot down, or God forbid, all 88 Gripens get shot down in the case of a war, and honestly, that's likely since they lack the stealth technology to stay in the air against more current technology, you're now replacing them at a much higher rate than the F-35. That means that not only will you lose your fleet of fighter jets, but that $5 billion network you just made to protect them, to make them usable, it's a brick. You built a brick for $5 billion. And to make matters worse, you're now replacing those Gripens with F-35s because you're a stubborn dumbass who doesn't know how technology actually works. And by the way, if your Gripens aren't getting shot down en masse by 2040, it's literally because you aren't fighting anyone. These things are quite literally target practice. In fact, they're expected to be completely outdated by 2030, the exact year we would have them delivered. On top of that, Quebec is currently building a depot designed specifically to service the entire planet's supply of F-35 fighter jets as an extension to our deal to buy those planes, which, by the way, will bring in around $3.5 million per jet per year. And for your information, there are already 1,325 of these things in the air around the world at this very moment, with a plan to expand that fleet to 3,500. So basically, you have the best jet in the world with the added bonus of being able to use the existing NORAD network. The service depot you need is right there in Mirabel, and you get to generate billions in revenue per year because every country in the world needs you to fix their fleet. Okay, so where exactly is the argument for the Gripen? Is it just that it's cheaper? That's not an argument. We can build 88 of them, then what? Crash them into the ocean? For what? For fun? Do you like burning money? I mean, even Stephen Harper wouldn't make the deal for the Gripen. Not when the F-35 is an option. Stephen Harper wouldn't do that. I hope. History's not all that great. Look, you don't have to be an expert to know that it's better to tow a tractor trailer with a transport truck than a pickup. The pickup is fun to drive and it looks nice, but it has its limits, and one of those limits is that it's not a transport truck. The Gripen had a good run, and it's still somewhat serviceable for what it's worth, but I mean, so did the biplane and the F-5. Now, if any of you pedantic armchair number crunchers want to complain to me that my numbers are selective or I'm cherry picking, you know full well that you can't price out this fleet without being selective. What are we supposed to do? Give you the range of prices so you can pick the lowest one and use that to make your argument for your favorite? No. Do your own homework, psycho. I actually presented the lowest estimate of the Gripen because it's far more likely the fans of that Swedish death trap will brigade this video than the F-35 because the F-35 knows it's right. So keep that in mind. I'm watching you. But believe it or not, the price is at best a middling issue when it comes to this 3-decade-old best investment Canada ever made. The biggest problem is we have no one to fly the damn jets. This entire conversation is based on the idea that somehow a 500-pound pile of human refuse and a 90-pound beanstalk who haven't left their computer in 3 months know anything about national defense whatsoever. Basically, what we're buying now is 88 multi-million dollar hood ornaments due to the fact that no one knows how to fly them. And this whole, well, if Carney had the stones, he'd just show the US who's boss and buy the Gripen anyway. Are we being serious? You want to waste billions of dollars buying and maintaining an aging fighter jet that you aren't going to get 15 years out of, even if it doesn't get shot down because you're mad at Donald Trump. Are you retarded? Hey, Donald, look at this horrible decision we're making because you exist and you won't acknowledge that we're actually good at being a country, despite all the proof to the contrary. Shut the fuck up. What Carney seems to be doing is making sure all alternatives have been examined before he locks us into a price tag that's ballooned to $27 billion after inflation, which is what would happen if we make the second order, by the way. It's a performative review for the EU and good idea for Canada to negotiate every number on every deal, regardless of whether it has 10 zeros or 2. Buying the jets is a start, though. A nice little conundrum to help you remember how effective Jean Chrétien was at fixing Brian Mulroney's disappearing money machine. If you're ever wondering how we got here, I mean, it's a fun little story. I'll tell it to you sometime.